13% of high schools and 35% of intermediates were free of sugary drinks by term 4. Primary schools were faring much better at nearly 70%. The Auckland University Professor of Nutrition and Global Health, Boyd Swinburne, heads the team that collated those figures. He says only about a third of New Zealand schools replied to its survey, and the Ministry of Education should be keeping tabs itself.
The level of kind of follow-up of monitoring and getting schools to report on that seems to be very weak, and so it's not surprising that schools, by and large, don't pay a lot of attention to it.
The Ministry of Education's Deputy Secretary of Early Learning and Student Achievement, Carl Lacane, defended the Ministry's lack of follow-up, but says he will review the Auckland University study.
We know schools are being asked to report information and take place on surveys on a regular basis, so we need to be careful we're not overburdening them with too much information reporting.
He says the goal set last year was a stretch target and aspirational, and he's pleased to see the great work done by primary schools. A long-time anti-obesity campaigner Robin Tumarth says if the ministries really want to make a change, they have to back up their words with meaningful support.
I can see that schools have a heck of a lot on their plate, and just a directive with no monitoring being put in place or no incentives or assistance to achieve this is probably going to fail in all but the most highly motivated, schools who are probably doing it anyway.
She wants the government to look again at regulations it scrapped which forced schools to sell only healthy food. The principal of Holy Cross School, Bruce Young, believes it's up to every school to make its own call, but says he would encourage them to do it. He says while the kids still love fizzy drinks, they've learnt that school's not the place for them.
Yeah, it's just part of what happens at school. It's like wearing a uniform. They know the rules, and sometimes they break the rules, but 99% of the children know the rules and they follow those pretty easy.
The Ministry of Health wouldn't be interviewed on the issue, but said in a statement the real situation's likely to be better than what's reflected in the Auckland University stats because they didn't include term 4. Mō te hōtaka o te ata, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
19 minutes past 7. Convicted fraudster Joanne Harrison urged the Ministry of Transport's chief executive to close down an internal investigation into her activities nearly 2 years before she was finally caught. Harrison was sentenced to more than 3.5 years prison last month after admitting stealing nearly $750,000. Emails released by the ministry show that its chief legal advisor was demanding answers from Harrison back in 2014 about the nature of contracts she was signing with a company called Sharp Design and proof that it had actually delivered any work. They show Harrison then contacted the chief executive, Martin Matthews, who just 2 months earlier had questioned Harrison about whether Sharp Design even existed, asking him to close down the inquiry. But that's where the email trail released by the ministry ends. Political reporter Benedict Collins asked Mr Matthews, who is now the Auditor-General, what happened next.
Did you close down that investigation?
No, I didn't. I instructed Joanne Harrison to continue to comply with my requirement to provide information to my chief legal advisor.
Did she provide information that reassured you, though, because this company was fictitious?
My recollection is that information was subsequently provided. I considered that information, and at the time I believed I was dealing with a non-compliance issue, and I issued an instruction to Joanne Harrison that in future she was to ensure she had procedures and practices in place to comply with our policies.
Is it normal, though, for a senior staff member like Joanne Harrison to write to you or calling on you to close down the investigation and to say that she was refusing to provide details around these contracts that she was overseeing, that she was dealing, refusing to provide that to the chief legal advisor?
At the time that request was made to me, Joanne Harrison claimed she had provided the information that was needed, and that was her explanation. I, at the time, did not accept that explanation, and I instructed her to carry on providing the information to my chief legal advisor.
It's very clear from the OIA that Joanne Harrison not only stole, best part of $750,000, but she also really ruined the culture, managed to turn staff on each other, really divided and, manipulated the organisation for her own ends. This happened under your watch. It seems extraordinary she was able to carry it out for so long.
I think, the point you've just made is a very important one, and the learning from this experience is that when you're dealing with a fraudster, these are highly sophisticated, manipulative individuals. I've frequently said to people that unlike a burglar who may throw a brick through the window and steal a TV, and leave a trail of evidence of their crime, fraudsters are sophisticated, and their whole modus operandi is to hide the crime. And that is why, now as Auditor General, I'm very emphatic that, while I accept, unfortunately, some of these bad eggs get into our system, we have to deal with them swiftly and thoroughly in the way that I did the moment I had the first hint that I was dealing with someone who was acting unlawfully.
That is the Auditor General, Martin Matthews, speaking there with our political reporter, Benedict Collins. 7:23.
Quick note on the latest traffic news in Auckland. It's crawling city band this morning on the southern motorway. And this is because of an earlier truck crash. Very slow between Nelson Street, where that crash took place, right the way back to Green Lane, and multiple lanes are still blocked. And this is because of road damage and debris that's on the road. There are some emergency repairs being done too, so please avoid that area if you can at all. Also to Wellington, there was a crash southbound on State Highway 2 at Horokiwi in Lower Hutt. The car has been cleared now of the lanes, but there is still congestion, significant delays this morning right back to Melling. And there was also a truck breakdown in the same area that was contributing to those delays. Well, now West Coast residents will breathe a sigh of relief this morning when rail traffic to Christchurch resumes after a 6-week break. The line was blocked after a fire in early February, damaging bridges, tracks and signalling systems between Cass and Springfield. But from today, it's back in action. Eric Frickberg reports.
The fire on February the 4th burned 300 hectares of vegetation alongside the railway line. In the process, it damaged the tracks, including a railway bridge that needed 12 wooden piles replaced. A senior KiwiRail manager, Todd Moyle, says fixing the line was hard work in a remote, hot and sandfly-infested area. But from today, it's all over.
We're going to be running 4 train coal programs in each direction, and 1 general train which takes a lot of product out of Westland area and other areas on the west coast, so 5 freight trains, and we'll be looking to run a few more trains on weekends to try and accommodate some of that backlog of coal.
And the Mayor of Buller, Gary Howard, says that backlog is significant.
15,000 tonnes, a big stack of coal.
Mr Howard says the coal is awaiting KiwiRail at a convenient spot just on the west coast side of the main divide, after being trucked down from North Westland.
Solid Energy have moved 15,000 tonne of coal to Igamatua so that they can speed up delivery to Port Lyttelton as soon as rail's back in action, and they've done it very well.
This intensified road freight is causing extra wear and tear on the roads, according to Chris McKenzie, who's Chief Executive of Development West Coast.
There are more trucks on the road at the moment. On a couple of the corners, you are starting to get a slight deformation of the road with the additional truck movements. It does highlight the state of the transport network in the top of the South Island.
2 days after the freight service starts, tourists will be back again on the Transalpine passenger service. Jim Little is Chief Executive of Tourism West Coast.
The Transalpine's a pretty iconic, journey, and it's very valuable to the coast and also to Christchurch.
Jim Little says despite the Transalpine problems, tourism to the west coast has actually boomed. That's because travellers deprived of the Kaikoura route by the November earthquake have been driving down the west coast instead. The return of the Transalpine service will help that still further, bringing in an extra $15 million in tourism spending in the region each year. For Morning Report, call Eric Frickberg, 10A.
It's 26 minutes past 7 on Morning Report. The Prime Minister, Bill English, has changed his message about charging companies for water amid increasing public backlash that it needs to be looked at. Well, last week the government stressed it was not overly concerned with what's quickly becoming an election issue. But Mr English now says there is opportunity to change who pays for what. The Environment Minister, Nick Smith, told Morning Report that even charging 10 cents a litre would be disastrous for some industries.
When you look at the amount of water that's made to produce milk, that works out at $40 a litre for milk. Now, that would destroy our dairy industry as well as make a huge consumer cost. Everybody seems to pretend that if you put an extra charge on water, that it'll come out of the company's profit. No, it does not. It adds into the price for consumers, and we should only put those prices where the resource is genuinely in short supply.
Bill English is in the Wellington studio with me, and this interview is also being live streamed on the RNZ YouTube page and also on Facebook Live. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it time to start charging for water that's being bottled?
Well, you have to answer an awful lot of difficult questions before you can get to that stage. Look, I can understand people's concerns, and there's been a lot of work done over recent years where on all aspects of our fresh water, and we focused on the top priority, which has been lifting the quality of it, getting a measurement system, making sure New Zealand can say it's got pure water, it's great for our environment, important for our economy, particularly in the regions. But the business of how you actually overturn a century or so or more of the law that no one owns the water and no one actually pays for the water, they might pay for the use of it or the facilities or the infrastructure, there's a lot of questions there would have to be answered.
Yep, but you're the Prime Minister and it's a hard job, and so is it your job to actually tackle some of those questions? Why wouldn't you charge for it?
Well, in the first place, you have to decide on pretty critical issues like who owns it, and our common law has always been no one owns the water. That's been pretty critical, actually, to New Zealanders' perception of how they can use it, access it, and so on. And then the tricky bit of who pays for what. That a lot of that's been discussed around the issues of quality, around irrigation, farming, minimum flows in rivers and so on. So the Land and Water Forums approach these sorts of issues through what they call allocation, and that's really helped us all understand how complicated it is.
People are pretty riled up about this. Is this something you're willing to lose votes over?
Well, look, it's not a matter of votes, it's a matter of doing the right thing for our precious resource.
But a lot of people would say you're not doing the right thing by the precious resource, and they may well choose to show you that in the ballot box.
Well, that's always up to them. But we have to sort out a systematic way of dealing with it, and a tax on water needs a lot of work to be able to get to that point.
So you're categorically then able to say this is not something that is going to change before the election.
Oh, it's certainly not going to change before the election. I mean, if only for the very basic issue of deciding who owns it after decades of everyone being extremely sensitive to the idea that anyone owns the water.
Okay. Why change your tone, though? Because last Thursday you were saying we've got to work through all the existing issues around water, about how the history of first in, first served started and what the transition might be. We're working pretty carefully through the complexities. That's Thursday. Saturday, the government has the opportunity to change who pays for what with respect to water, and you were acknowledging that it was a sensitive issue. You seem to be shifting around there and then coming back to where you started.
Well, you can change it when you answer all the questions. All I'm saying is that the Land and Water Forum work, which has been a very broad base of people, iwi, recreational groups, green groups, farmers, who've published a couple of documents. As I said, they take a bit of a look at these issues, and it's helped us understand there's many questions to answer, including the ones that Minister Smith just raised.
Are you personally in favour of water, New Zealand water, being bottled and being exported?
Well, it's not a matter of being personally in favour. It's
Well, yeah, but I'm asking you, are you?
Well, it's legally possible. A few companies do it on a relatively small scale. As I said, the top issue for us has been, the high priority has been the quality of all our water, which has a much wider impact on our community than a few bottling firms.
Isn't it pretty rich, though, to allow the export of bottled water at virtually no cost for that resource, when some parts of New Zealand, like in Havelock North, they haven't had a secure water system out the taps?
Well, I don't think the two issues are connected at all. I mean, in Havelock North, they have every right to have a secure and safe water system, and there's an extensive inquiry going into why it turned out that wasn't the case.
What about in tankers? Because we do hear about some of these factories not actually bottling the water at source, it's going out in tankers. You're perfectly happy with that scenario?
Well, look, as I said, it's legally possible. They're doing it where there's a renewable resource. It's on a very small scale, and we've had a higher priority, which has been the quality of water for all our communities, and 6 or 7 years hard work to get that in place. that has raised all these other issues around allocation, who owns it, who should pay what for what, in what circumstances. And I can tell you from grappling with these issues that you've got to be quite careful to understand what you're doing. You need to be very careful about the wide range of our community interests, because you could start charging one lot and then another industry says, well, what about them? And how to get fairness, but also to be very careful about changing long-standing law.
We are just running out of time ahead of the headlines this morning, but if I could just ask you something else about Apple and their tax bill. Is it right that Apple has paid no local tax in the last 10 years?
Well, it would be wrong if they haven't obeyed our law.
But what's the figure? Have they contributed or not?
Well, we're not allowed to get advice about individual taxpayers, so I can't tell you. The individual taxpayers' affairs are confidential. The intent of the system, and New Zealand has a tough system for this, is to ensure that everyone pays their fair share. And it's vital for those who feel like they do pay their fair share that they see everyone else doing it. That's why about a month ago we issued a new set of policies alongside the work we're doing internationally to ensure that particularly these internet-based companies do pay a fair share. Now, and most people who looked at that, the experts tell us it's among one of the tougher regimes, so we get the chance to consult on it and implement it and see what effect that has.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Bill English, the Prime Minister, in the Wellington studio. It's now 27 minutes to 8.
And coming up...